Good evening. I'd like to call tonight's Anacortes City Council meeting to order at 6 p.m. And at this time, Ms. Hunt, would you take the roll?
Mr. Carter?
Present.
Mr. Young?
Here.
Mr. Walters?
Here.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath? Ms. Moulton?
Here.
Mr. McDougall?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Gear,
Yes, Ms. Moulton and Mr. Walters.
I would like to move to excuse Councilmember Cleveland McGrath from tonight's meeting. She's unavailable at this time.
Okay.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to excuse Christine McGrath from tonight's meeting. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, anything else? All right, I'm going to move on to item 2, announcements and committee reports. And item 2A is the COVID update. And I'll give that at this time. As of today, March 22nd, Island Hospital has tested 13,593 people. We've had 275 positive cases, 49 people admitted to the hospital, and 0 deaths. They have now given out 4,864 vaccines at Island Hospital. In Skagit County, we've had 4,308 positive cases of COVID. We've had 63 deaths and 274 people hospitalized. The county estimates that in the 98221 area code, we still actually have 385 COVID cases. Currently in Skagit County, the case rate is 142 cases per 100,000 residents over the last 14 days. And in Skagit County, by all registered vaccine providers, 50,787 COVID vaccines have been administered as of last Friday, according to the Department of Health. Around 14% of Skagit residents are fully vaccinated now. Additionally, public health hit a milestone last week, delivering its 10,000 dose of COVID vaccines. That's a huge accomplishment. And thank you to the vaccine providers in our community for making a great progress. Right now, all Washington counties have entered phase 3 as of today. And the Healthy Washington Roadmap to Recovery Plan, and you can go on the governor's website to see what that looks like. And our community, probably the biggest factor is for our restaurant community and gyms and that type of facility now can go to 50% of capacity with people staying in the building. Governor Inslee also announced that we'll open in the next phase of vaccines on March 31st. And the new phase will include people's ages 60 to 64, other critical workers in congregate settings, including restaurant and food service workers, manufacturing and construction, people living in congregate settings not previously covered, and people experiencing homelessness or who access to services in congregate settings. Governor Inslee announced long-term care facilities will be able to have indoor visitation if one person is vaccinated. For example, if you're going to visit a grandparent in a long-term care facility and they're vaccinated, even if you're not, you're able to visit indoors. The extension of the eviction moratorium goes through June 30th to continue protecting families struggling with the economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. In Washington State, we've had 357,000 cases of COVID. We've had 5,224 deaths. In the United States, we've had 29.9 million cases and 542,000 deaths. 1,000 deaths. And worldwide, we've had 124 million confirmed cases of COVID and 2.72 million deaths. And that's reported to us by the World Health Organization. And that completes my COVID update for this evening. Are there any questions? All right, we'll move on now to item 2B, our Housing Affordability and Community Services Committee report.
Mayor Gear?
Ms. Moulton.
Hi, thank you. The HACS committee met last week, Wednesday, the 17th, and it was an extra great meeting because we had some community members there. So staff has been working hard on making meetings easily available for public participation. So that was great because we talked about quite a few things, including a down payment assistance program that they're doing in Bellingham. But currently we don't have information that it's something that we can take advantage of, but staff is still researching that a little bit. Basically, the trouble is there are no homes in the appropriate price range, even in Bellingham, because the prices are so high. So this might not be something that will work for us. We talked a little bit about the Habitat for Humanity desire to build a couple of homes, 2 or 3 homes in Anacortes, and there is a draft land lease in progress because those homes could potentially be built on city property on 6th Street. More to follow on that. We talked about the CDBG funding, the coronavirus funding specifically, and also Section 108 loans that could be used to help the Anacortes Family Center build their next building. And that's still in progress because the HUD requirements are very onerous. So staff is working their way through that with Dustin Johnson of the Family Center. We also talked about our social services strategic plan that we're working on. And Councilmember Walters has created a draft document that we can all input into, where we will compile our list of social service providers and their services. That will be the foundation of our work, identifying the gaps. Once we have that done, which we have set a goal for ourselves of April 7th for the committee to all input into that document, then we will reach out finally for our roundtable discussions with our community members and stakeholders, of which we have many, and I'm very grateful for that because we have really wonderful people with real world experience that will inform our work and help us to better serve our community. So that's super exciting. I think that's basically it, unless Mr. Walters has anything that I've forgotten.
Okay, so we'll move on then to item 2C, Planning Committee. Is that all included in there?
No, actually, separate meeting.
All right, very good.
Thank you. We just had that meeting just finished at 5:59. Councilmember Walters and Ms. Cleland McGrath and I were there with Mr. Miesmer, our planning director, and Joanne Stewart. And we had a few conversations. One, there have been some questions about some derelict buildings, especially on the waterfront on the Guimas Channel. And their owners are working on permitting required to demo them. And the city permitting is one thing, but there are also ecology permits, I think fish and wildlife permits. It's in a flood zone. So it's pretty complicated. So that's why those move so slowly. So we'll be seeing some activity on those soon. There have been some questions about parking on 5th Street and employees of businesses parking there all day long and prohibiting customers of businesses to park there. So Mr. Miesmer will visit businesses again with a letter encouraging business owners and their employees to park 2 blocks away from the downtown core, which would be great and much appreciated by everyone. Then we talked about the Section 108 loan again. So that was, I already talked about that. And, so there's been a lot of foot traffic on the 500 block of Commercial, especially on sunny Saturdays, which is great. People are really coming out to support their local businesses and bring that vibrancy back to our downtown, which is so welcome. On the 500 block, particularly with the restaurants and parklets, it's been a little congested. So people have been walking out into the bike lanes in the street and it feels a little bit hazardous. So we're talking about how to address that, what would make the most sense, and we haven't come up with anything exactly yet, but except for to say be careful out there, and thanks to everyone who's coming back downtown. That's it.
Okay.
Here.
Yes, Mr. Walters.
And just to tag on a little bit, Mr. Miesmer was going to look into moving some of the planters that are in the
last 5 feet of sidewalk closest to the road out adjacent to the parklets so that people can use more effectively the piece of sidewalk that isn't occupied with restaurant seating. And he was going to see if he can't do that pretty quickly, at least in that 500 block commercial.
Okay. So we're talking the block from the art gallery to the Brown Lantern, right? That block there.
No, from Johnny Picasso's to the post office. So,
Oh, that block.
and Ghirardelli to like through Adrift and that, and then El Jinete and yeah, so that that's
Okay. Because
yeah.
the other block farther north has solid parklets and there's no parking on one side. So all right, I was just trying to get clarification on that.
Yeah, it will be up to Mr. Meismer, I think. So maybe not exclusively the 500 block. And also I thought the focus was to be on the west side of the street.
Okay, all right. Okay, anything else for the planning report? All right, then we'll move on. This is item 3, this is public comment. And if there's anyone with us this evening from the public that would like to talk to us about anything that is not on the agenda, it's your opportunity to come forward at this time. Okay, so if you're here for an agenda item, you'll have an opportunity at the time of that item. If it's, yeah, we'll go from there. All right, so then we're going to move on to the consent agenda, items 4A through G. Council, what is your pleasure?
Mayor Deere,
Mr. Miller,
I move to approve consent agenda items A through G.
all right.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Miller, a second by Mr. Young. Is there any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Now we're moving on to item 5 under other business. This is item 5A. It's the wastewater treatment outfall project overview and update. Mr. Scharbeck, Mr. Buckenmeyer. Discussion item only this evening.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm going to be real brief. All I'm going to do is introduce Eric Scharbeck, as everyone knows, our city engineer. He's going to introduce the project team and talk a lot about the project. I just want to, I'll say one thing. We've, as a council and staff, we've talked about this project in bits and pieces, different elements of it, the location, the contracting elements, the funding elements, but this is where we bring it all together tonight and let you see a big picture overview of exactly where we are, what we've done, and where we're going with that. So with that, Eric, take it away, buddy.
All right, thanks a lot, Fred. Thank you, Mayor, Council, and public. So the project team, we're proud to present our work to date on this project. We're taking this chance to dive into some good details, and we also see this as an opportunity to respond to public questions and concerns that we've heard. I'm going to introduce Rob Webb, our construction manager. He's going to give the presentation. So Rob is the president of Dalton, Olmsted, and Fuglevan. He's a civil and coastal engineer with nearly 30 years of experience in the field. I first met Rob, I think it was 2009, if anybody remembers the Skyline Marina dredging project. Rob, he was the project manager that worked for us. He did a really nice job, stellar job, very difficult situation. I don't know if you remember, but there was over 200 separate slip owners, and each of those is a private property, and we had to work with all those owners and dredging. He did a great job. So we've kept in touch over the years. We had this project, and early on I asked Rob to just sit in as an advisor to help me make sure that it was kind of going the right direction. And really soon, he fit into the team really well, and he established his knowledge and expertise. And then I asked him to help the city further by taking more of a construction manager role. There's a lot of moving pieces on this project, and he's helping the city kind of keep them all together with his experience. And I'll just let him take it away from here. Rob, you're up.
Very well. Thank you all. Good evening. Thank you, Eric, Fred, Mayor, Council, public. Appreciate the opportunity to address you all this evening. Hopefully we can give you some information on the project, answer any questions you may have. I'm happy to answer questions during the presentation or at the end, whatever is in accordance with city custom. Can everybody see my slide okay?
Yes.
Okay, so this is just slide 1 that I have up right now, which is just an overview slide showing obviously the wastewater treatment plant. So, agenda for tonight, go over a little bit more introductions here of the project team, go into some of the project need, why we're here, why we're doing this, speak to the federal disaster declaration that overarches the project, go through the alternatives analysis that we did in a brief fashion, and then get into some of the particulars, of the outfall design and construction. And so as far as the project team, you all know Fred and Eric. They just introduced myself, Rob Webb, and then I am privileged to work with the rest of the city team. That includes Ross Widener of Widener and Associates, doing all of the permitting, FEMA coordination, and a large variety of permits, as I just heard there, for the shoreline demo work. Consistently here, we have a large slew of federal, state, local permits we need. And then as far as our actual design team, that's being headed up by Eric Bergstrom over at HDR, that's the project manager. And he's supported by 2 different engineers, Bill Fox from Cosmopolitan Marine Engineering, who is responsible for the marine portion of the design, and then Colleen Patilla there at HDR, that's the engineer of record for the Upland portion of the project. In terms of the project need, this is being driven by a high flow storm event that happened back in 2020 that caused water to come up into the streets via the manhole. And then on a subsequent inspection of the existing outfall, showed that there was a gap in the outfall pipe and what appeared to be a vertical discontinuity in the invert or the bottom of the pipe as the little wheeled camera went down the pipeline and went off a sudden drop and then continued on. And so it seems that there's damage to the outfall pipe there. And so the project begins there to correct that damage due to that high flow event. This event, storm event, was declared a federal disaster by FEMA. FEMA project number there, 4539DR, affecting these various counties here within the state of Washington. That disaster declaration, as you can imagine, brings in certain federal protocols, opportunities, etc. One of those is that the project is eligible for FEMA funding. And so far, it's been approved for a reimbursement of the emergency work with an initial funding level approved and then additional levels pending based on additional details of the project as they come out. And again, Ross Widener is coordinating that. We also get with this some benefits for permitting in that some of the activities are already streamlined and pre-negotiated, so we don't have to go through all of the various technical details. And those give us significant advantage to the project because they reduce the permitting time and complications that we would otherwise encounter. As part of the project, a full alternatives analysis was conducted by HDR to look at various potential routings of the outfall pipeline. And these were rated based on a number of evaluation criteria, one of which was the ability to get the outfall constructed this year in 2021, as opposed to having to wait a full year. We can only construct in the water, limited number of months a year, generally speaking, August 1 through February 15. And so if we miss that window, we have to wait a year. And as you can imagine, as we get later into the winter, our weather, especially for marine construction, becomes more challenging. So ideally, being able to construct it this year in the late fall, as opposed to January, February, or missing a year, is a critical component of our evaluation. We also have some environmental factors. There are what's called sediment management area, or SMAs 1 and 2, adjacent to the port's property. This is an old log yard, and that's under Department of Ecology Management as a contaminated sediment site. And those can have impacts on our schedule and risk management issues. SMA is the more contaminated of the two sediment management areas, and I'll show them to you on a figure in a minute. We also evaluated the project for potential impact of contaminated soils along the route, impact on Port of Anacortes, current and future operations, construction within the city right-of-way, potential for eelgrass impacts, critical fish habitat in the marine environment, potential for bedrock impacts along the alignment both uplands and in water, potential for residential impacts, and then obviously cost. And so there was 5 potential alignments evaluated. This graphic here shows you the existing Anacortes wastewater treatment plant down here at the 6 o'clock position. The current outfall pipe is the yellow line that takes a meandering course up through the 12 o'clock position on the figure and ends at the face of the dock at the port right there. That's where the current diffuser is. And then we show our 5 different alternate evaluated routes here, A through E. 4 of them go through the port's property. Alternative E avoids the port's property and also avoids the port's deep draft dredge area right in front of their dock. The other 4 would need to go down deep into the marine sediments to get below that deep draft dredge area and avoid the port's current and future dredging. I also mentioned SMA 1 and SMA 2, the 2 areas being regulated by the Department of Ecology Toxics Program. SMA 1 is shaded here. That's the more heavily contaminated area. SMA 2 is this larger area out here. So for the most part, alternative E avoids the more heavily contaminated area, but does still pass through the border of SMA 2. So we have been coordinating with the Ecology Department of Toxic Control on that. So with those 5 alternatives, all of them end at the same location out in Gwemish Channel, because that is part of our mixing zone study on where to place the diffuser of the outfall for proper environmental dilution of the effluent coming out. And so all of them may take a different route, but they all have the same endpoint. And that endpoint out there in the channel gives us a much greater dilution factor, 10 times the dilution that we currently have at the face of the dock. And so that's a much improved environmental condition for the outfall going forward. That evaluation summary, as I mentioned, went through the various 5 routing alternatives, looked at those factors I mentioned, evaluated their potential impacts on the project. We also obviously looked at the length of the outfall and see it varies depending upon the course, because again, they all start and end at the same point, but their intermediate routing affects the total length. All of these are constructible, but have various levels of complications. And the port has been supportive throughout the entire process, giving us input on how their operations and the outfall might interact now and in the future. We also obviously looked at costs for construction. When we look at the costs for construction, alternative E is the lowest cost. It also had the lowest number of impacts on that previous table. And so from that, we come out with a preferred alignment E. It does not require construction on port property. Gives us our highest probability of starting construction in 2021 as we're planning. It avoids that deep draft area. It allows cut and cover construction in both the uplands and the marine area, because we did consider tunnel boring, but it was more expensive and more technically difficult than conventional cut and cover for both the uplands and the marine. And then there's also some additional factors and considerations of public comments I wanted to mention down here at the bottom. Our pumping requirements, the current outfall requires pumping at higher tides and higher flows, and we expect the future pumping requirements to be similar in terms of the times of the day and tides, but lower in terms of the amount of pumping required. And I'll give a little bit more information on that in just a minute. There's no uphill pumping involved. We are doing a deep excavation to maintain a horizontal pipe throughout the extent of the upland construction. So we're not following the grades uphill and then back downhill. We're digging a deep enough trench so that our pipe is relatively flat going out. And this will require blasting in the uplands. I'll show more information on that in just a minute. But that blasting in the uplands avoids some nearshore outcrops of bedrock that would require blasting. And that blasting in or near the water is a much more complicated issue than blasting in the uplands itself.
Here.
Yes, Mr. Walters.
Back a couple of slides, the last cell in the table seemed to indicate that there was, slide 10, that there was some unresolved question about alternative E. Have we now determined the depth of the rock along the alignment?
Yes, sir, we have. We have done a full investigation of that. We are quite comfortable with the depth of the rock along the alignment, and we also have done rock boring itself to establish the strength of the rock.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, no worries. There's a lot on this slide. Is there any other questions? Okay. And so as far as pumping requirements, this is for us, technical geeks. I just got to put this out there. In terms of our existing outfall, it's a relatively small pipe. It's been repaired, it's been replaced, it's been other things over time. And as a result, it is a rather small diameter pipe, down as small as 18 inches, I believe, along some of its current alignment. And that, as you can imagine, is, causes restrictions. It's a small straw, if you will. And so to get out the full plant capacity or typical top end that we talk about of 10 million gallons per day, it takes 3 pumps running at that flow with a high tide, and it's pumping against 22 feet of total head. And when we go to the new outfall, we're going to a much bigger pipe. And so now you're sucking your milk straight through a much bigger straw. It's much easier to move the fluid. There's much less resistance. So we wind up with a reduced amount of head that we're pressing against. So we should be able to run 2 pumps instead of 3 at the plant. And that's because the new outfall, being larger diameter, is more hydraulically efficient. That's my one slide to look like an engineering geek. In terms of the outfall design and construction itself, when we think about it, there's 3 components or projects that build this up. One is the upland portion of the outfall. It goes from the wastewater treatment plant down through the streets and out to the shoreline at the end of U Avenue, where we will then transition to our marine portion that goes there at the shoreline out to the end of the outfall out in Gwemish Channel. There's a third corresponding project that's not part of this, which is then after this outfall is in place and operational to abandon and remove the existing outfall. When we talk about the marine portion, I'm going to kind of go from offshore to onshore here because that also fits with our current construction and contracting schedule. Again, the in-water portion is more schedule dependent with that limited in-water window. We also have an issue where we have a limited number of marine contractors to perform this work. And so we wanted to get the marine portion moving along as quickly as we could so we could get contractors interested in it So we would have a good slew of contractors provide good quality and value to the city when we get to construction. So consistent with that, talking about the marine piece first, this shows the alignment of the outfall here, coming from the shoreline here, coming out due north, and then going off out into the terminus. This is the bathymetry contours in the background, shallow water near the shore, deeper water offshore. These little specks are boulders and other obstacles along the way that the alignment has been routed around. The alignment has also been chosen so that it runs perpendicular to the hill. So it follows the path that a ball would roll down the hill, which gives it its maximum stability. It doesn't want to roll down the hill anymore by itself. When we talk about the engineering plans for this, top picture is a cross section or a profile showing the pipe as it leaves the shoreline, comes down through the near shore area. This portion of the pipe here will be dredged or excavated in below the mud line. So when we're done, you will not see the pipeline at all. When we get out to near what's called the pier head line, about near where the large mooring dolphins are that you see out there on the waterway, the pipeline will come out of the out of the bank and transition into a bottom lay with the pipe just laying on the surface. It's in height. Along the pipe, you see these little dashed marks. Those are concrete weights, concrete anchors that are strapped to the pipe that hold it in place. And I'll show more on them in just a minute. This is part of our geotech study here. We did pretty advanced geotechnical studies along the alignment, both geophysics and then also borings in the field to confirm the geophysics. And here you can see the various types of geologic units we're going to be constructing in. We do have rock, it's this green color, and you can see we are above it in all places. We are, however, into some of these glacially overridden materials that we know are a very dense, very hard material. And so we're making sure we give specifications that are consistent with that digging effort to the contractor so that they come prepared to handle that hard digging material when they arrive on site. That material runs, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
I can't quite see it clearly on my computer, but could you briefly give me the depth from the start on the left side, if that's in fathoms or feet, and then the depth where it ends on the right side of the chart, just so I can follow?
Certainly. This datum here is it's very small, I'm sorry. This is North American vertical datum. So this is 0 right along here. So tide range is right in here.
Yep.
Off at the very far end, we're down around negative 60 feet below 0. So about 60 foot in water depth. Over here on the left-hand side, we're up above sea level, about an elevation of plus 18 up on the top of the ground. Our pipe here, it's a 4-foot diameter pipe, and you can see its bottom is right around elevation 4, top is around elevation 8.
Perfect, got it. Thank you very much.
Yes, no problem. Please jump in. I only get to see what it looks like on my screen. I really, one of these days, I'm going to set up 2 so I can see what everybody else sees. When we talk about the marine construction, we're talking floating plant, floating cranes, etc., tugboat, divers, support equipment. We're going to be putting in about 1,000 lineal feet of 42-inch diameter HDPE, high density polyethylene, plastic, if you will, pipe. It's going to be held in place by those concrete anchors. They're about 7,600 pounds a piece, and there'll be 64 of them attached to the pipe. The way this thing is constructed is that pipe will be trucked into somewhere near the site, contractor's choice. It'll then be fused together, basically melt it and stick it together. And then the anchors, which come in 2 pieces, will be clamped onto the pipe. And that will all be done at an off-site location. The contractor will then be simultaneously dredging and excavating the nearshore area and the landing. So that nearshore area where the pipe gets buried, and the landing is where it actually comes up onto shore. Once that is ready, they'll float and tow the pipe from where they seam it together over to the site. And once it's there, they'll submerge it using a technique called controlled submergence, where you pump water into one end of the pipe, bleed air out of the other, and sequentially sink the pipe along its length. So to just show that, because that's a lot of words, here are the anchors I'm talking about. And just to put these things in perspective, they're about 9 feet across, 1.5 feet, 2 foot wide, and about 6, 7 foot tall when assembled in their two pieces. Here you can see a series of them strung out on a pipeline that's floated into place and getting ready for submergence. In the near shore area, as I mentioned, the contractor will come in. They'll put in probably some steel sheet pile shoring to create that landing area where they can then dredge out in between it and have a notch that comes into the upland area to lay the pipe. They will put in the sheet pile, do that dredging, and then, as I mentioned, tow that assembled pipe with all its weights in place out to the site. And in terms of durations, the pipe preparation will all be done off-site, and that'll take a little bit of time. The precasting will take a little bit of time. But in terms of actual work that most of the public will see, we're looking at probably 2 weeks or so for some upland site preparation to get access prepared. We're probably looking for 2 to 3 weeks of work to get this marine portion ready. And then the pipeline, when it's ready, tow it over, and in one day it'll go from floating to sinking, and its installation will be done. And then we'll remove the sheet piling and do some backfilling on top of the pipe in the marine area. And that's probably about on the order of another week. So the actual physical construction of the marine piece in the public eye is relatively short. When I speak to this technique of controlled submergence, a couple of graphics here, I apologize, the orientation of these are reversed. Top figure, shoreline is on the left. Bottom figure, shoreline is on the right. The way this works is when the pipeline initially comes in and is floating, it's full of air. The contractor will then hook their crane onto a piece of it some distance from shore, lift it up a little bit to create a portion there that the water cannot get beyond. They then start pumping water into the inshore section, which floods the area between the lifted section and the shoreline, putting weight in the pipe. That then causes the pipe to sink to the bottom. As they then continue that pumping of water in and that venting of air out, the pipe, just like a rope as you're laying it down on the floor, will gradually sink down to the bottom along its full length, and then they pull on it with tugboats at both the end and where we want the curve to put it down in its proper place on the bottom. And this can be reversed at any time during the process. Should a problem occur, we just reverse and we let the water come out and we pump air back in. We can float the pipeline back up and adjust it if we need to. We get halfway through and a significant unforeseen storm comes up, it can be managed as necessary. When we talk about our shoreline landing here, we're talking about the area at the end of U Avenue, the very north end. It's right next to where the Wyman's habitat area was built a few years ago by the port. So that's where you see this rock here that looks a little bit fresher than everything else. This erosional area here is where our pipeline will come ashore. You can see the erosional marks there by the fence post foundation that's exposed. This PVC pipe is part of a small stormwater catch basin system that's there at the end of U Avenue, and that will be cleaned up and addressed as part of this work also. You can also see right now we have a considerable amount of debris out here, old asphalt, old concrete, etc. That will be cleaned up and removed as part of the excavation for the near shore area. And then again, riprap and fish rock brought in to resculpt and restore that shoreline. Looking now on the upland side, so we were just looking in from the water at that bank. We're now standing on the uplands. looking out to the north. You can see here in the middle a small catch basin. That's what feeds water into that pipe we were just looking at. Out here, we also have a City of Anacortes pump station that we have to maintain access to, and then a number of residences here that we are very cognizant of, make sure that they have access during and after construction. And this area right here is our meeting point for the uplands and the marine construction. Right now, as I mentioned, we are in our contracting mode for the marine work. We're finalizing our 100% design, but due to the limited number of contractors and the limited window, we wanted to get the project out for the contractors to be aware of and get it on their calendar. Our objectives in the contracting: get the qualified contractor that provides the best value to the city. We're very cognizant of making best use of city funds throughout this process. Want to make sure we have a contractor that is aware and brings that to the table. The RCW that you see here gives us the ability to make this type of selection and do more of a qualification or other type of selection as opposed to low bid alone. So right now we are in a pre-qualification stage. We sent out requests for qualifications to a significant number of contractors that have experience with this type of work here in Puget Sound and on the West Coast. From them, we received back 6 statement of qualifications last Thursday, and we're currently in the process of reviewing those. Based on those qualifications, we will then get priced proposals from the qualified contractor teams, and then a selection will be made based on a combination of both qualifications and price. This being complex work, technically, permit-wise, environmentally, we really want to make sure we bring the right team to the table to do the work successfully. And then, unless anybody had any questions on the marine section that you wanted to jump into now, I'll start talking about the upland alignment and its construction. So again, when I talk about the uplands, I'm talking roughly about the first 1,700 lineal feet or so of the project, coming from the wastewater treatment plant over and out to the shoreline there. Again, about station 17 plus 0 is where we make the handoff from upland to marine. When we talk about the upland construction, we got that 1,700 lineal feet. Here we're using a 48-inch diameter fiberglass reinforced pipe. It's lighter than concrete. It's more chemically resistant, corrosion resistant, just physically stable over time, lighter. And so that's the pipe choice for the uplands. To accommodate the construction, 3 manholes will be installed. As I said, this is a cut and cover, so we're digging a trench on the order of 15 to 30 foot deep. We do have about 400 lineal feet of that excavation that will be in rock that will require blasting, but not unheard of in construction or there in Anacortes itself for construction. Along that alignment, we have 29 known utility crossings of every flavor: water, sewer, power, phone, fiber, you name it, we got at least one of them. We have a potential for groundwater that we are aware of. There is a wetland behind the wastewater treatment plant, and there is an active dewatering system at the wastewater treatment plant. So we have information on that, are preparing for it. And we do always have the potential for cultural resources, so appropriate monitoring plans are in place for that during the work. As I mentioned, the uplands is going to be a cut and cover trench, so just a couple of pictures here showing that. We anticipate the contractor will use trench boxes, although they could use an alternate shoring system that is a contractor design. And so you can see here a typical trench box. This is 2 of them stacked on top of each other. You can stack more of them as necessary to accommodate depth. Those can be put into the excavation as necessary for stabilization and safe work practices. And here on the left, you can see an example of that in practice. There's the trench boxes, workers in there making connections between the various segments of pipe. And here you can see the contractor did what's called benching down a little bit, where they excavated a little bit on the shoulders of the planned utility trench, so the trench itself wasn't so deep. Here is our geotech information. And again, we've done considerable investigations on this. Geoengineers is the geotechnical engineer on the project. Considerable experience there in Anacortes. One of the most important factors in selection of a geotechnical engineer is their local knowledge. And so here is the results of their site investigation. If you can't see it all, the green is rock. Everything that's not green is a fill or a soil material of some type. The brownish color is fill material that is identified as being brought in. The yellow and the blue are glacially deposited and overridden materials. So again, a very dense material is expected. And then here in the green section, you can see where we would be doing the blasting to install the trench. And there you can see two.
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Webb. This is a super informative presentation. I have a question about blasting.
Yes, ma'am.
So how deep is that rock from the top of the highest point of the rock down to the pipe itself?
This right here is on the ground surface right here is about elevation 35, and the bottom of the pipe is around elevation 30. So this is about a 30-foot deep excavation right here.
Okay, so is that along 3rd Street or?
Very good question. So up here at the top, and maybe they're a little small, this says 3rd Street, and this says U Avenue, and this is right at the intersection of 3rd and U, where this manhole will go to make the turn in the pipeline right there.
Okay, maybe you could talk a little. I mean, maybe you could talk a little bit about the blasting.
Certainly, and I've got a slide dedicated to that in a minute.
Okay, great.
I used the joke earlier that it will not be anything like the exploding whale, and instantly I dated myself on how old I was. So I said I probably wasn't going to use that reference here tonight, but anytime I talk about explosions, I like the exploding whale story from Oregon. So, but yes, let me, in just a minute, I will get to that.
Okay,
because yeah,
great.
that is a deep hole right there, but certainly not out of the ordinary for this type of work. So blasting. Figuring that was going to be a big question, and that we've had a number of public concerns about it already. We've done extensive investigations out there. The rock has been cored, it's been tested, it's been evaluated for its compressive strength, fractures, etc. We looked at the potential of using a direct bore, Big Bertha, Elon Musk boring type thing, and the blasting and excavation would still be required right at that manhole you mentioned, because in order to make the turn there, we would have to bore the pipeline in 2 different directions. So we would need to dig that hole to start the boring in the 2 different directions. So we kind of would have had both blasting and boring if we had done that. And the blasting and excavation, direct excavation, was considered to be a more cheaper, less risky operation. The blasters do have a large number of protocols that they will put in place. That includes public notification, pre and post property surveys. They have a very prescribed blasting plan that they will put together based upon the properties at the site and their desired product of the blasting in terms of how much rock are they removing and what size are they trying to make it. They will also put down what are called blasting mats before any of the work is done, any of the charges are detonated. I have a little video here. This probably shows a more extreme case, I have been told, than anything that we should expect. But I have wanted to show something to at least give folks some idea. So you can see here, this is a blasting crew working in a residential neighborhood. They're putting in a sewer line, just as we're talking about here. They have now set their blasting charges. They have overlain their blasting mats. The blasting supervisor is standing here in the middle with his white shirt on, and the very concerned homeowner is standing back here in front of their house. This is very short, but and again, that's much more dramatic than anything that we are currently anticipating. And especially once we get below the first lift, if you will, and they're down deeper into the hole, we don't really expect almost any observable impacts at all.
Mayor Gear?
Yes, Ms. Moulton.
So to continue on this train of thought, how could we estimate how deep that video we just saw was? I mean, there will be multiple blasts, right, as they go down. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, were you addressing me or the mayor? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I just was
You.
asking. Sorry, it was
I
council.
don't know how many.
I wasn't
Okay.
going to speak because it wasn't my turn.
Your turn, Rob, trust me.
I'll ask Mr. Webb then.
All right.
So this will be repeated, right? Because you have to go down 30 feet.
That's
so,
correct, ma'am.
So it'll be multiple blasts all the way down to 30 feet.
That's correct.
And
They'll
this will
take it off in lifts, and those lifts will be determined by the blaster themselves based upon, they don't want to use too big of charges. They could take all 30 feet at once, but that would be bigger explosion than any of us want. They also use time series charges, so it's not just one big boom. It's a series of staggered small charges that go off to create that cascade effect that you just saw. That will be developed by the blaster in accordance with the rock material that they are blasting and the limiting of that propagation force outward from the blasting point. So the blaster will come up with that. It might be 4, 5, 6 feet that they're taking off in a lift to go through and use a minimal charge to get the material out. We don't want to blast any more than we need to because that just creates additional material.
Thank you. And do we have, this might be a question for Mr. Buckenmeyer, Mr. Zarbak. Do we have local blasters? I mean, is this something that's been done in our town before or in our area that we could look to as an example?
I can speak to that a bit. Thank you, Ms. Moulton. Yeah, so the Rock Ridge neighborhood, there was quite a bit of blasting up there just to get the utility lines constructed. I think I was up there at least 3 different occasions over 3 different years and watched that exact video happen in front of me. Well, not exactly in front of me. I was a distance away, but yeah, but it's but we certainly do have the experience with it.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else I could offer on the blasting subject? I certainly understand the concerns there as we start talking about blasting in city streets.
I think I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. Let me get beyond that. He likes to keep playing again and again. There we go. So as we talk about the Upland Construction, we've really had considerable discussions amongst the project team and with Fred and Eric about how to reduce impacts to the public as practicable. We understand the working through people's neighborhoods and everything else here. And so there has been a public outreach that has gone on so far. We will be putting together a very detailed traffic control plan to manage the work. There's a lot of materials that'll be moving in and out, as you can imagine, as we're excavating that trench, taking the excavated material away, bringing in the pipe, bringing in backfill materials. We have a lot of construction traffic and materials that will need to be brought through. And so we're working on a very detailed traffic control plan that allow the work to efficiently happen and also maintain safe access to the residences throughout. And we're looking at the use of an incentivized contract to motivate the contractor to get areas of the project open and completed as quickly as possible to reduce the duration of those impacts. Some of the other benefits, obviously this has impacts, but we like to think there's some long-term benefits. The city's looking at undergrounding utilities, overhead wires along the alignment as practicable. Get those out of the way. We're going to increase the public access at the end of U Avenue there, kind of improving what is just that paved area with the ecology blocks. That work is not FEMA funded. The work beyond restoration there back to the original would be something beyond the FEMA funding. And then along the route itself through the city, we're looking at improving the streets, the curbs, sidewalks, pedestrian access, etc. Because some of the areas along there don't currently have curbside or a guidewalk. At the end of U Avenue, this is just conceptual, currently still being developed. But right now, as I previously showed, it's just this asphalt paved street end with the ecology blocks. It's directly next to the Ports Wyman's habitat area and little public walkway right here along the very left of the photo, which is right here along the left-hand side of this picture. And so we're looking at putting in a public access area here. This is the street down here. Currently, we have a drive configured in here to provide access to the residences long-term. This has been specifically developed to limit the public from going in there. It's midway through a curve, so if you're not really looking for it, you won't even notice it. It's got a rather restricted access to come in and out to discourage the public, as signage to keep the public from wanting to drive in. As the public walks in, it would then open up to the north, encouraging them to come out into this open space area here. There's a walkway through it to come out to an observation area. That drive then comes in and then kind of restricts down again with some native vegetation that would then discourage the public from going further back into the residences. We have, again, signage there to discourage that. And then we have a couple of parking spaces we're looking at here out on the road frontage itself that connect to the walkway and give public access to that street end. What's currently some invasive vegetation out there would be removed and replaced with native vegetation. And then this would also be construed to give the city access to their pump station out there, as well as the new manhole that's going to be constructed here at the end of U Avenue. So in summary, we did our alternatives analysis. We looked at 5 potential alignments, A through E. E is our preferred and planned alignment. We're well underway on our permitting. That's a long journey, but we're making good progress. We're targeting construction in 2021, hopefully starting the marine work in late summer, contractor getting the pipe, getting it fused together, and then looking to do that installation at the site late September, October, if possible. That's our preferred window for tides, weather, etc. And then the upland would be starting later this fall. We're currently still finalizing our plans and specifications for that. That would then allow us to move into the contracting phase for the upland portion. And with that, I've reached the end of what I have to say, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Council, we do have one member of the audience that would like to ask a question. Can I go with that person first and then refer to you? Okay, John Wilkinson, you have your hand up. Matt, can you help him in?
Hello, I've tried to.
Yeah, welcome, John.
Okay, thank you. Maybe you can't see my picture, I'm not sure why, but.
I can't, but I can hear your voice.
Okay, yeah, I guess based on the neighborhood meeting which occurred on March 9th, after talking with neighbors, put together the summary pros cons thing that we'd submitted to council. And at the March 9th meeting itself, the question came up about why come up to you, which is basically in people's front yards, and versus going straight down T, which I guess was alternative D in Mr. Webb's presentation. And alternative D, I'm not sure why it would cost more than E because it's shorter and flatter than on the uplands at least than alternative E. But I think the main neighborhood concern obviously was the 30 feet deep blasting trench along U, which is in people's front yards. And we live up the hill, so we're not immediately there, but we all endured the Wyman's blasting for a period of a month or so when they were blasting rock out of that rehab site down the hill. And then obviously the other thing is a long period of time in U blasting and trenching, etc., for this pipe would create access problems, perhaps even down Third and the U-Haul facility, etc. So would like more clarity on A, why alternative E costs more than alternative D, given that it's a much flatter upland section, and B, why what period of time are the neighborhood going to be impacted by this deep trenching and blasting?
Okay, we'll get you those answers. Thank you. Would anybody else like to ask a question before I go to council? Okay, council, I don't see any other hands up, so it's now your opportunity to ask Mr. Webb what you're thinking about.
Here.
Yes, Mr. Walters.
Well, so I think that was a good question asked by Mr. Wilkinson. I wonder if Mr. Webb can address that now.
The D versus E and yes, would you address those two questions, Mr. Webb?
Yeah, D versus E, the cost difference between them, and maybe also point out precisely where the blasting is going to take place along the route.
Certainly. Let me try and tackle them one at a time, if you will. And so here is our 4 routes that we looked at. And the discussion at the moment is alternative D, which comes straight out of the end of T Avenue here and goes out, versus alternative E that is over here to the right coming out of the end of U Avenue. Some of the concerns and cost drivers for alternative D are the eelgrass bed that it goes right through the largest portion of, and that would have to be mitigated. The fact that it goes through the port's deep dredge area, so we would have to go very, very deep with our pipe to get underneath of that, compared to our other routing that avoids that. So we have much deeper, much greater excavation required for D. We have the eel bed impacts, and then we have bedrock right along the shoreline here along alternative D. And you can see those outcroppings underneath the restaurant out there. And so there, the concern is that blasting in the marine environment would be much more complex, costly, and difficult to permit than our blasting that's required for alternative E, which primarily is along this stretch of Third and U right here. It's basically about centered on this turn at Third and U. This is where that very deep manhole, this is where the deeper manhole is compared to regular construction. It's not all that deep, so I shouldn't say that.
Okay, any other questions regarding that? Thank you, Mr. Webb.
Certainly.
And then the second question is the period of time the neighborhood would be impacted.
I don't have a definitive answer on that right now, as we are still working with the potential blasters and contractors in discussions on that. And then the idea of an incentivized contract to try and limit that. But we do recognize the access limitations in this area right here, and are looking at ways to limit the contractor's impacts so that the access is preserved to the extent practicable. Limit our impacts to the public. But until we get a little bit deeper into the actual contractor discussions, the duration's a little bit hard to peg down.
Okay, thank you. Additional questions, council.
Mayor Gear,
Mr. Walters.
just out of curiosity, why does the pipe start at a different location at the wastewater treatment plant than the existing outfall pipe?
They tie together back here. This is just showing where the pipe comes out and enters the city right of way, and where this one is. This one will connect. The existing pipe comes out of the pump house here and goes this way. We're going to tie into it right here.
So they basically do start at the same spot.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
Good question, though. I never thought about it before, but looking at the graphic, it is confusing.
Yeah.
Mayor here.
Yes, Mr. Miller.
Just a comment, great presentation, first of all, really gives a clear picture of what we're trying to do here. But with the alternative E outfall, I mean, I think it's a huge thing to not be in the dredging area. But I also think it's also not risk-free because, you know, perfect dredging doesn't always happen. But I do think it's definitely low risk long-term. And you can't really put a price on that, having it outside the dredging area to make sure that deep water port is still functional.
Mayor Gear?
Yes, Mr. Young.
Yeah, just also a comment too. You know, I think in the meetings we've had prior to this, it's just been, it's something that we really have to do. I think we all agree on that. And I think that the real challenge was, how do we have a greater, much more control about how the people and the things that we need to deal with in order to make this happen? And one of the reasons this path came forward was because it minimized the interactions between not only the port and the city, even though we are collaborating and working together, but it just really minimized all of the potential things that might impact this project. And so, you know, after looking at everything, I am okay with moving forward with this. I do think, though, that we just continue to inform the public about how and how long this might be, and we make sure everybody is clear that this is a temporary inconvenience, but for the greater good of the city that we're working on, and this is something we just have to push forward. And I think you guys have done a great job of that, but I'm just asking that we continue to do that in every way possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Any other comments?
Mayor Gear?
Yes, Mr. Walters.
Did we look at any alternative where instead of cutting east on 3rd Street, we would go down what looks to be the alley between 3rd and 2nd, so just north of 3rd? I don't know if we actually have right-of-way through there or not.
I can respond to that. That is port property. It's been vacated.
Oh,
Okay. Would there be any advantage to going through there? It seems like we might avoid some impact on some residences and potentially businesses, although greater impact maybe on one business.
It's hard to say without having analyzed the rock. I feel it's probably 6 of one, half dozen, you know. I think they're probably pretty equivalent, but I guess we don't know, since we don't know the rock. I had one other quick comment for the group. I've heard a couple comments about the Wyman's construction work, and that is different work than what we're doing. To my knowledge, there was no blasting. I could be wrong. To my knowledge, there is no blasting that happened at Wyman's. It was all mechanical, and it took a long time. That's hard rock. It took a long time to get through that rock, and Mr. Wilkinson lives right there, so he knows exactly how long it took. He said a month. It was at least a month. The blasting should probably be quieter and quicker than the Wyman's.
Mayor Gear,
Ms. Moulton.
I sort of have an aside about vacation of city property. I feel like we've come across this in a couple of discussions lately. And this is one of them where the city has vacated property that perhaps it might have been prudent to keep. What's past is past, but just in future conversations going forward, when we have opportunities to vacate property, I'd like to think back at times like these of the results of that. So, thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you. Any other questions from Mr. Sharback and Mr. Webb this evening? So
Here, here.
this, yes, Mr. Walters.
So how about the question of going through that second cleanup site there that the board is dealing with? What do we anticipate in terms of permit processes or delay associated with going through the far east edge of it?
We have been, this is Rob Webb. I can answer that if it's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have been, environmental dredging is basically one of our specialties. So dealing with contaminated sediments and the regulatory process is something that we at DOF do all the time. Was one of the reasons that Eric brought me into the project. We're avoiding the most heavily contaminated area. And along our alignment, we have done sediment sampling to characterize the material. We're getting those final results from the lab right now. They have been delayed, I admit, due to some issues within the lab itself. I'm happy to speak to offline. But we are planning to dredge that in, and the material that we dredge will then be taken to an upland landfill and disposed of. And so in the terms of environmental remediation, that's basically the gold standard. So far, the Department of Ecology has been fully on board with the project and does not anticipate any problems or delays.
All right, so this tonight was for discussion only. So Mr. Buckamar and Mr. Webb, when do we think we will see you back in front of us?
Oh, good question. I would say once we have a contractor on board, maybe even both the upland and the marine contractors on board, come back to you, give you another update on, you know, who that guy is, who that contractor is. You'll certainly be there for the bid award, right? You'll have to be there when we award a contract. It'll take mayor and council action for that. But then after that, just once we get it'll be a while after that before we get some timelines from them.
Okay.
What
right.
are their expectancies?
Okay, and if we get more feedback from the community, we can bring that forward too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Eric and his group have done a great job of just being available to the public.
Good, good. Okay, well, Mr. Webb, that was really an incredible presentation. I sat through a few in the last 20 some years, and that was one of the better ones. It was really interesting, really well done.
Thank you, ma'am. Glad to provide value to the city.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So if there's no other discussion, we'll move on to our next item on the agenda tonight. And it's item 5B. And this is resolution 3026, updating a unified fee schedule. This is for discussion and possible action. Mr. Hoagland?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and members of the audience. I'll share my screen real quick. This is a simple resolution tonight to update the unified fee schedule. There's a couple of items on here that I want to point out. So we did an update to the Washington Park fees, and I believe this came to council earlier this month. So this is familiar to council, but these are the fees listed here for both the campground and the parking fees, and actually the fee for the wood bundles is on here as well. But this is an update to the fees, and we are taking this opportunity to add these fees to the unified fee schedule as well. These fees are scheduled to be effective May 1st. Additionally, we have the parks impact fees that came to council this earlier this month as well. So I did want to point out that you see we have the effective date of September 1st here, and that's reflected on the unified fee schedule as well. The resolution that's in your packet, there was an error. This is listed as January 1st, 2021. So I will update that with this corrected version in the fee schedule, or I'm sorry, for signature. The final thing that's on the resolution that will be added to the unified fee schedule is the cost for transportation concurrency review. So this is something that's already in effect. This is a cost that the planning department incurs and then passes on to the customer. We are just wanting to add this to the unified fee schedule for transparency purposes. So that's these three items being updated and added to the fee schedule. This is the full fee schedule itself. See on page 13, we have the impact fees here for the parks with the September 1st effective date. And then at the very bottom of the fee schedule are the Washington Park fees that have been added with an effective date of May 1st. So I'll be happy to answer any questions council may have.
Mayor Gear,
Mr. Walters.
we already adopted the parks impact fees by ordinance, right?
And that's correct. So this is just incorporating those into the fee schedule. You're right.
Okay, good.
Okay, any other discussion? Questions, action?
Mayor Gear,
Mr. Young?
I move to approve Resolution 3026, updating the unified fee schedule.
Thank you.
Second.
A motion by Mr. Young, a second by Mr. McDougall. Is there any discussion? Ms. Hunt, would you take the vote?
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Walters,
Yes.
Ms. Moulton,
Yes.
Mr. McDougall,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Carter,
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you, Marcia. All right, well, moving to the final item on our agenda this evening, and this is item 5C. This is open for public comment. It's a request to Skagit County's local governments to oppose the Imperial Metals Minerals Exploration Permit in British Columbia at the Skagit headwaters. I'm going to introduce this evening. As a member of SCOG, Skagit Council of Governments, I was asked by the Skagit Watershed Group to bring this to the City Council and ask for your support in writing a letter or a resolution to request that the Skagit's, that we as Skagit local governments oppose this project. The reason this is important is this Imperial's Metal Corporation, a Canadian-based mining company, has the largest remaining metals mining claim in the Skagit watershed. And they have applied for an exploratory mixing permit that we believe, and it's to do an open pit mine, and it'll be called the Giant Copper. It's the belief by the Skagit watershed and local tribes and City of Seattle that this will not only hurt our water supply in the Skagit River, it will also have a detrimental effect on the salmon population by releasing these chemicals and heavy metals into the river. The Skagit, and I attached all the letters from the City of Seattle and the Upper Skagit and the Swinomish. The Samish tribe, I believe, was taking action this past weekend. And we, as the main regional water purveyor in Skagit County, were also asked to take a stand. It was also the Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs in Canada itself also are taking a stand against this project. Interesting thing I found out, though, we can take a stand, but the Skagit watershed has an endowment that has millions of dollars in it, and it allows them the opportunity to go to the table and negotiate with this company to keep this company whole financially and preserve our watershed and our river. So it's not a win-win or a lose-lose. It could be a win-win. It's not a lose-win. It's a win-win. They can be reimbursed for their costs as a company, and we can protect our Skagit River. So I did send you the packet, and I'd be interested in your thoughts this evening and what action you would like to take, if any.
Mayor Gear?
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. I would just like to read something from the packet that you sent us. I think that it's helpful information about, I'm sorry?
No, thank you. Go ahead.
Oh, sure. So it speaks to the company Imperial Metals, who has these mining claims. So Imperial Metal had a tailings pond collapse in 2014, spilling 25 billion liters of contaminated effluent and sludge into drinking water and major salmon spawning grounds, widely reported as the worst mining disaster in BC history. The government has had to step in to invest $40 million in cleanup activities, and no criminal charges were pursued for failure to act in the face of known deficiencies. So this is a company that already has had a major catastrophic failing. And as you've mentioned, we're talking about our salmon and our drinking water and like
The overall habitat.
and also countless generations of indigenous peoples' land and rights, and that's really important too. So there are a lot of reasons to oppose this, and I can't think of a single one to support this mining claim. It creates no financial benefit for any of us. It's not jobs. It's not anything good for the economy. All it can do is hurt us. So I strongly oppose the mining and support a letter of resolution by the staff to prepare for us to oppose it.
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Young.
No, I wanted to echo Ms. Moulton's sentiment. It's so funny, Ms. Moulton. I was going to quote that exact same spot. But you know, I've had some lengthy discussions with various stakeholders about this issue, and quite honestly, if we're looking as a city to preserve the natural beauty of what really makes this such a wonderful place to live for all of us, if we are also considering this blue zone, and if water is so important, you know, we just cannot afford to risk destroying the very thing that provides for us, but yet also at the same time that makes us so unique. So, you know, I too strongly support this, and in looking at the support that's been coming from across the state, I think that we're in good shoes in order to push forward this resolution, and I support it too as well.
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I support the city sending a letter opposing this as well. But I would like to point out to everybody that mining is something that is required on the planet. But in this particular case, it's our job is to look after Anacortes and where we live and the water that we have, because you know, in spite, I wouldn't besmirch the company. Those things happen. But, you know, mining does have to happen, especially if you transition to a green economy, because these types of metals are required in things like batteries to get green energy. However, that being said, you know, this is certainly a pretty easy one, looking out in the interests of our local community and the Puget Sound and the Skagit River watershed, that I'm comfortable signing on to the letter.
Mayor Gear?
Mr. Walters.
I also strongly support a resolution. I think that the Swinomish Indian tribal communities resolution would provide some good material to fashion one for ourselves. However, I would also incorporate something that Mayor Durkin put in her letter, and that is a hope that we can close the donut hole that appears on the map that's in the packet of unprotected land that is surrounded by the Skagit Provincial Park, North Cascades National Park, and the E.C. Manning Provincial Park. Skagit River is the third largest river on the west coast of the United States. It is the last best hope, quote unquote, to recover salmon. And Skagit County, I would expect to see every city in Skagit County and Skagit County government jumping onto this bandwagon as well. Skagit County has invested so much time and money in recovering salmon. As the Watershed Council points out, copper, even at low levels, is fatal to salmon. I would think every city in Skagit County government would be jumping on this bandwagon to preserve the gains that we have made in salmon recovery. Even if we weren't the biggest water supplier out of the Skagit River, it seems like we have a part in that. And we certainly have a part in salmon recovery as a result of how we have been constrained gladly to play that role for salmon recovery out of our water system. So we might note that as well.
Well, I feel like I have clear direction. I could bring back to you when on the next time we meet, a resolution and a letter for your pleasure, to take action on at that point. And at the Skagit Council of Governments meeting, they were gonna see what we did, and then I was gonna pass on what we did to the other cities in Skagit County, and they would follow suit. They felt like that we needed to do the research and take a stand. It was late in the day that day, and they didn't have time to address it. And I stood up and said, well, the city of Anacortes will take it on. And Tom Wooten was there. He said the Samish will take it on, and we'll send the Skagit Council of Governments copies of what we've done so the other cities can move forward also. So we don't meet next Monday, but the first Monday in April, I'll have that to present to you. If that's, I don't know if we need any other action than that. You can take action once we bring it to you. Okay, well, thank you very much. Anything else to go to the order tonight? All right, we'll see you all soon. Have a good evening. Bye. The meeting is adjourned.